Danny, how's it going, brother?
It is going absolutely wonderful. I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you for on. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, of course, man. I actually just, what's funny, real quick. I think I listened to one of your podcasts a long time ago with Mike Vacanti because
Wow.
so I'm friends with him. We text occasionally. Him and Jordan Syatt both. That's how I got into the fitness game. And so whenever Mike would be on a podcast, I'd always listen to it. So the funny thing is, I'm sure I listened to your podcast a long time ago because you did that a little while back. Maybe like a year or so ago. Um, and then I was like, I realized as I was going through your stuff again, I found you through, following basically startup Twitter, kind of like business Twitter. And then I saw you and then I went through your list and I was like, I've definitely heard this podcast before. And then next thing leads to another. I followed you, connected a little bit, asked you to come on the podcast, and here you are. So thank you, man. I appreciate you coming on.
It's so cool that I've been doing the podcast long enough for someone to say, "Yeah, I listened to you a long time ago." And that's like actually maybe 6 or 7 months ago, but still, um, yeah, it's really awesome. And it just goes to show you're not going to convert people on the first time they come across you. But if they keep listening to you and you keep popping up and then they're like, "Oh, I recognize him from here or here." That's how it always comes to be with content. That's how it always comes to be in business. And it's really just about, I don't know, being a good person and letting that shine through, right?
Yeah, of course. Serendipity, I think, plays a huge part in it, which we're gonna talk about. But I'm actually going to, well, real quick, what I want to do is typically how I introduce people is whenever you meet somebody, whether it's at the grocery store, at the bar, at a restaurant, your parents or friends are like, "Hey, what do you do?" What do you respond to them?
I say I podcast is how I tell them. It's a great question. But you know, what I'm doing right now is just like it's new, right? It's never been like 10 years ago. What's a podcaster? Like that's not a thing.
Right.
And now for someone to say that that's what they do, it's interesting. You get a lot of confused looks, but something about it tells me that that is more of a sign that I'm on the right path than I'm an idiot. We'll see
Yeah.
if that proves to be true
No.
in a matter of years.
Absolutely. I think it's even. I think it's almost actually cooler than this, but it's kind of how people used to say, "Oh, I'm a writer," and then people are like, "Oh, okay. I don't know what that means." Like that could be anything. Whenever you say you're a writer, but podcaster is it sounds. It sounds cooler and it sounds more new age, like you said. And I think it'll only get more and more common, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and
Definitely.
I'm gonna pull a. I'm actually before we get into things because I do want to get into your backstory a little bit. But I'm actually pulling a Danny Miranda on you. I listened to a recent podcast of yours. I did a little bit of research. I know you're big on research, and you said that what people should do is ask one of your best friends a question that they should ask you, right? And so you said that typically people that come on your show, you ask them a surprising first question and it usually gets a laugh. So I went to your boy Tej and I do, you want real quick, because how I got this name, you said Tej on one of your podcasts, and then I was like, okay, I don't even know how to spell that first. So what I did was I went through your follow or who you followed on Twitter, scrolled all the way down, and little did I know he was probably like the first person you followed on Twitter. So he was the last person on the list. I sent him a DM, and one of the he gave me a little bit, so don't stress too much. But the first one's good. He said, "Ask him if his grandma has changed her mind perspective on shrooms." Will you tell that story real quick?
My grandma, you're amazing, bro. That is incredible. I'm so impressed. I've never personally done that. But I appreciate the hell out of that you took the time to do that.
I got
So
you.
first of all, thank you. Second, my grandma, episode 9 of the podcast, I had this brilliant guy named Dan Go on the podcast. And in it, he talked about psychedelics and mushrooms and how much of a profound effect it's had on his life. And my grandma absolutely loved the episode, but the problem was that she didn't like the part about the shrooms. So I took a screenshot of that and said like,
I have the screenshot if you want me to repeat it real quick.
Please.
So literally you posted this. It was October 7th, 2020. You said, Grandma's got some thoughts on our most recent episode with @FitFounder, was your guest. And she said, in quote, "Love the podcast except the shroom shit." And then you posted another one to that thread. You said more from Grandma, ... She said, "Do not do psychedelics. It's awfully awful. It's not for you. Who gives a shit? Who cares if you feel love? It will ruin your sperm and you'll have wacky children." First off, where is your grandma from? And then continue with your thoughts.
My grandma's from Queens, New York. I believe
Of course,
she grew up.
Of course she is. That's who I pictured in my mind, but I wasn't for sure, but that's who I pictured.
Yeah. She's probably losing her mind right now listening to this. But Grandma, first of all, I love you. And second of all, her caring attitude and her overcompensating and caring so much is part of who I am, why I am who I am today. And her ability, like she would try to help me with stuff from a young age. And I'd say like, no, Grandma, I want to do it myself. And I was always that way. And because of that, we've had a great relationship. But she's always worried about everything, worried about now it's the vaccine. Like, when are you going to get the vaccine? And it's like, I love that about my grandma, that she's so caring, so willing to help in any situation. And it's the best thing in the world, having a grandma like that.
That's amazing, man. No, were you born and raised in New York City? Because I know you said you were from New York now, but I didn't know if you were born and raised there.
Yeah, born and raised in Long Island, New York.
Okay, got it. Yeah. So would you say, because I'm always fascinated too, because I know that you're very much an optimist. You're very much a happy dude for the most part. At least that's what it seems like from the outside. And I can just tell from our vibes, I'm also very much that way. And I feel like we could actually have like a nice off, like a kindness off with people. Because I feel like me and you both, I can just tell just by listening to you and things, like we get off on being really kind to people. Like it does like, of course it's great to be kind, but it's also a selfish thing to us because we feel so good, putting that out there. But what I'm getting at here is, did you have that growing up? Do you think that your parents was a big thing of that? Did that evolve over time? You want to dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, 100%. So for 24 years of my life, I would not describe myself as optimistic or kind. And what happened was I started meditating, and meditation was really the first time that I started to understand myself and become self-aware really for the first time, and was able to understand that if I love myself, then I could love other people. And it took a lot of unprogramming the programming, and nothing against, I had an incredible upbringing with my parents, and nothing against, my education or anything like that. But it was just myself personally. Like, I wasn't optimistic. I wasn't kind. I wasn't looking out for other people was my natural go-to. Today it is. And the reason why it is because I've spent a lot of time listening to myself and uncovering a lot of the trauma and the issues that I've had in my own past. And from that place, I've been able to have less on my shoulders and take the books out of my backpack and walk around with more energy and optimism and kindness. And it all stems from meditation. The more and more that I look at my own life.
Yeah, I think what meditation does a great job of doing is not only understanding yourself, but kind of understanding reality, like kind of just accepting what is, right? I know that sounds woo-woo or whatever, but it really, whenever you kind of just have a deep understanding, and especially starting with yourself, the limits to that, I think you're a walking testament of it now, of what you're doing and what you're trying to put out there to other people. And one of the things that you talk about is what's your quote about being the highest version? Is that what you're trying to get out of other people, right?
Yeah. I'm trying to pursue my highest version so I can help others do the same.
And what does that mean? What does the highest version mean to you?
The highest version to me, someone who is pursuing improvement, someone who is doing the difficult things they said they were going to do, someone who looks at a challenge and steps up to the plate, someone who doesn't make excuses, someone who, when they do make excuses, becomes aware of those excuses and can do something about it the next time. We're not all perfect. We're not going to go 100% at all times and push forward, but it's like being mindful of yourself, being mindful of how kind you're being on a daily basis, how much attention and present moment focus you have. These are all things that embody pursuing the highest version to me personally.
I think one of the biggest, I heard somebody, it was actually my buddy, Nate Green. Have you ever heard of Nate Green before? He was in the fitness industry. I'm going to send you Nate Green because you're going to love Nate Green. If you like Mike Vacanti stuff, Nate Green is it, because Mike Vacanti and Jordan Syatt put me on to Nate's work, and he's kind of more behind the scenes and stuff now, but you'll really like that. But one of his definitions of success was basically is like, how do I feel whenever my head hits the pillow at night, right? Like kind of how do I feel about how I acted throughout the day? So everything that you were saying, that's kind of what it reminded me of.
And along those same lines, it's like, are you making your 10-year-old self proud and your 80-year-old self proud? And pulling at those two strings is what I think of when I think of, so if you can make yourself proud at the end of each night, and when you're hitting the pill, you're happy with what you did. You're making your 10-year-old self proud. You're holding on to that childlike mentality, and you're making your 80-year-old self proud. You're doing the things that you don't want to regret at the end of your life. You're making those decisions. You're doing what you need to do. That's like such a life well lived to me.
Yeah. It feels good. It feels really good. And of course, it's an ongoing practice and it's refinement. And what that actually means, definitely evolves over time. I think to give maybe people a little bit more of the origin story, it might be a good idea. So I've heard you talk about Danny 1.0 and Danny 2.0. Kind of get into that a little bit because that may give a little bit of background and then kind of an overview of what you just mentioned.
Yeah. So in September of 2019, my friend Tej, who we mentioned before, at Comedic Bisman on Twitter,
shout out.
He had me create this mentality folder, right? And this mentality folder talks about the person I want to be, the type of actions I want to do on a day-to-day basis, the goals I want to have, the things I want to achieve, et cetera, et cetera. And I was creating this folder of Danny 2.0. This is the type of person I wanted to be. And it was not who I was in that moment. And so I'd review this folder probably 3 times a day for 6 months straight. I reviewed and reviewed and reviewed and reviewed. By March of 2020, my parents, without knowing about the folder, started calling me Danny 2.0.
That's wild.
Like, what in the world does that say? That my behavior had changed so drastically that they couldn't even call me Danny because that was not who I was. And it's fascinating, it's fascinating because I was so ego. I was so not this. I was not kind. I would never describe myself as like wanting to learn or curious. But the fact that I made this transition and change shows me that it's possible for anyone. I was in the craziest place and now I'm in this place. So it made me really excited because if my parents could notice a change in me, if I could make that change in myself, that's real, then it's like, what can happen? Like if I could do it, anyone could do it, is how I think about it.
I love it. I love it. What was the main kind of motivator of that? What like was there a certain event or something? Like what happened? Did you maybe look towards the future and be like, hey, if I keep going in this direction, I know you're a fan of JP, Jordan Peterson as well. So looking at the future, right? You could kind of act that out in your head and be like, hey, if I keep going down this path, I'm fucked. So it's like, did you recognize that? And then you decide like that day, hey, I'm going to pull out this folder. I'm going to start doing something to change, hopefully, what my future looks like.
Yeah. So I had this job that I was working for a couple of my friends, Nate and Scotty, and they're great dudes. But what happened was I realized that the job that I was working didn't align with who I wanted to be.
What age was this? I'm so sorry to cut you off. What age was this at?
23, 24. So it was 2019, July, August. And
cool.
I was turning to alcohol and gambling and all these things. And there was a point where I was like, the reason I'm turning to these things is because I don't like the job that I'm doing. It doesn't fulfill me. It doesn't light me on fire. And that's hard, right? Because I had built up my identity online and in person to my friends in real life. And my friends on the internet that I was interested in e-commerce and drop shipping. And I genuinely didn't feel in my heart that that was the right path for me. And it was a lot of trying to figure out who I really was. And I didn't know what to do. And I would, send Tej these emails saying like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Like, I don't know why I don't feel motivated to do what I need to do. So I made a difficult decision. I quit the job, and within a week, I saw the 75 Hard program. And the 75 Hard program was difficult, the hardest thing that I ever could see myself doing. But I saw it one night and I was like, I got to do this. And the next day I started day one. And on day one, I texted Tej and said, hey, I'm doing this program. He said to me, okay, let's text each other at the end of every day that we completed this program, because I want to do it too. So I was like, damn, like this is just a friend from the internet. Like who is, and he just wants me to text him every day. Like how kind. And so at first I didn't want to let him down by texting him, by not texting him, by not completing the program. By the end of the program, 75 days after, I realized I didn't want to let myself down. And I had changed so fundamentally as a human being. And it's like the growth from that is still going on today. And it's still something that I'm working on and getting better at. But it was like that moment where I can so clearly see that I made a decision and it had a crazy impact looking backwards.
Nah, that's beautiful. I think sometimes it takes something like that. It's more so the 75 Hard. And I talk about this with fitness often and with fat loss. It's kind of like, that's just the vehicle to become that version of yourself that you need to be. You know what I'm saying? Like 75 Hard, it's nothing magical about it, but what it did was it made you decide. And I don't know if you've ever heard Naval talk about like coaches and things like that, and how it's basically like all it is just something that forces you to stop procrastinating, and just you kind of pay for that initial starting point. So that's kind of sounds like what 75 Hard was to you.
Totally. And the other important point about coaching is that it's accountability too.
Yeah.
It's the ability to understand that, okay, I'm not just letting myself down. I'm letting this other person who I respect and admire because they have a great physique or they have a great mind or I respect them in some way. And so I don't want to let them down either. And that's really powerful.
Yes. Yeah, it really is. Yeah, we could go down that rabbit hole, but there is something that I did want to ask you, just seeing as how, so for people who don't know real quick of Danny, he's interviewed a lot of big people, especially in the business world, maybe not so, of course, so he has Mike Vacanti, Jordan Syatt, so the Dan Go, a few people in the fitness industry as well, but he's really focused with business. And so you had Gary V on, right? You've had my boy, Jack Butcher. I love Visualize Value, all of that stuff. I'm getting involved with all of those guys basically through Visualize Value first. That's how I found kind of everyone. But the question here is, what are some qualities that you admire in these certain people that you interview most? Like what are some of the main qualities that you admire? Actually, you know what, real quick, I want to flip this. I just decided inside this question. So outside of family and friends, when you're down or whenever you're looking for inspiration, who's kind of the first person that you think of? And then what are the qualities or characteristics of that person that you admire?
This is in family and friends, or no, just like
outside of family and friends?
I would say Gary Vaynerchuk. And it's so easy to think of the example of him calling my mom and
tell that story. Please tell that story real quick. If you don't, I know you tell it like every podcast, but it's a good story. So please go for it.
So I was in 10th grade at the time, and I have this Knicks blog. I love the Knicks. I write about the Knicks. Gary Vaynerchuk is a Knicks fan. So super cool. I would tweet him all the time. And this was back in the day where he had 850,000 followers on Twitter, but he would still respond to almost every single message that someone sent to him. So I would tweet him. We'd back and forth. We had a bit of a friendship, Twitter friendship online, where I'd tweet him a couple of times and he was kind enough to respond. And then I tweeted at him when his book came out, The Thank You Economy. Hey, Gary, big fan. My mom won't let me come to the book signing because I'm in 10th grade and it's a school night. And he said, great. What's your mom's number? and he calls her on the spot and gives her a voice message. And it's just like, that is absurd. Like, he had 850,000 followers. I was in 10th grade. He could have been doing a million other things. But instead he chose, okay, I'm going to call this kid's mom. And so for him to do that left such a lasting impression on me. I have the tweet printed out that he said, like, hey, I just left your mom a message. I have that printed out on my wall to remind myself of, that's what this is all about. It's all about kindness, right? It's all about like going the extra mile for someone, helping someone in that way, and never being too big or never being above it. Like, that's what it's all about. So when I'm down and thinking like, oh man, like, what am I doing here? Like, that's the type of thing that I think about because it's so real and so personal to me.
And I think it's such a positive sum game, right? Like kindness, like it's literally good for everybody. And just like, cause I'm a huge Gary Vee fan as well. It's how I also found, actually, I don't know if I found Mike and Jordan first, then found Gary Vee or vice versa, but it's just like how he was talking about how karma is just so practical. Like being kind is so practical because it's just kind of like the universe, excuse the woo-woo-ness here, but it kind of conspires to help you if you consistently do that without, asking for anything in return.
And it's practical too, right? Like if you get to that point, I remember Gary Vee was talking one time and he was talking about like how he was on this big talk show. And he's like, do you think I would have got to this point if someone or if enough people thought that I was a dick? Like, the answer is no. Like, someone would have not invited him or been like, no, I don't want to have that guy on. It's practical because it's people that will vouch for you in the long term. So that's how I think about it.
Do you ever, this was just a random question that came to mind. Do you ever think of, because I know how much I enjoy being kind to people. And like I said in the beginning, I feel like we both really do enjoy the feeling we get from doing that. Do you ever fear that having that identity or being the optimist or things like that can prevent you from sometimes sharing the real shit to other people, to your followers and things like that? I remember I sent out an email to my email list and it was just kind of like, basically, it was just kind of sad, to be honest. I still joked around, I wasn't just complaining to my email list. I added some value in there as well. I wasn't just, moaning and groaning. But whenever I shared that, a lot of people were concerned. So what I'm saying is, like, do you ever have that same fear of not being able to share whenever you're not as optimistic?
It's a great question. I believe just about putting the real self of me on the internet. And the reason why I believe this is because in 2018, I went under a pseudonym and I didn't know myself. And I went under the name Danny Roars. And looking back at my tweets, I was like, that's not who I really was. I didn't even know myself.
Wait,
and
why
so
did you do that? I'm sorry to cut you off again. They pop up. Why the pseudonym? Why did you do that?
Looking back, it's clear to me that I didn't want my friends to see my content. I wasn't proud of what I was posting. You understand?
Of course.
So it was like, when people did find my stuff, I was like, damn, like, that's weird. I don't want my friends to know. I didn't know myself. I didn't know who I was. I didn't spend any time with myself to hear myself and to listen to what was actually important to me.
Were you putting out like positivity, like stuff that kind of you're doing now? Or like, what were you afraid of them finding out? What was the content?
It was e-commerce content, dropshipping content.
Got it.
And I was like,
selling and stuff.
And something about it wasn't really me. And I felt that in my heart, but I didn't have the awareness to realize that I was just acting as if I was someone rather than really being that person. And that's a good sign for people, is like, if you're posting stuff on social media and you don't want people to find out, that might be a sign to look inward and to evaluate yourself and to meditate for 3 weeks or a month straight, because that would have I would have came to that realization, I think, if I had done that. But that's hard to do when you're acting not in alignment with who you really are.
Yeah.
So,
And I also think that we can play it up in our heads a lot too, especially being younger and things, and knowing, you grew up in New York and things, people are going to have opinions, right? But it's just like, whenever you first go out and start something new, or you put yourself out there and kind of make yourself vulnerable with, if you never post, I call it like doing Instagram like a normal person, where they just post random things about their life. But whenever you start to actually give some type of advice, right? And then you have the people around you like, oh, who do you think you are? You gotta toughen up real quick and be very comfortable and look inward very fast.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is everyone was supporting me. All my friends were like, this is so cool. Like,
of course,
you're doing this. But I wasn't in alignment with who I truly was. And I didn't even know that. And it's like, now the difference is people will find my content randomly. I'm like, let's go. Like, I know this can actually help someone. I know that like I've been through some real shit and faced my demons and come out on the other side. So if you're somewhere along that journey and it hits you, it's like, let's go. That's amazing. I'm so happy.
Mm-hmm. Dude, I think, whenever you say let's go, it reminds me of Mike Vacanti so much, because you guys say it exactly the same. And I know you had him as a fitness coach at one point,
yes,
which we can maybe touch on in a bit, but it's so funny you say that, and that was the point that I was actually getting to. You made it for me, was that people don't care as much as you think they do, right? Like, most of the time they are going to be supportive. Like, you just need to give it a try. The risk is so much very made up in your head, but the potential opportunity, right? So asymmetric risk and asymmetric opportunity, the opportunity to start a podcast, as you've been realizing, is exponential, right?
It's so crazy. This conversation would have never happened without me starting that podcast, right? It's like the amount of people that I've connected with, the amount of serendipity and surprise and enjoyment that I've got out of life, all related to the podcast. It's been the greatest decision I've ever made. So
that's powerful. Yeah. And it's funny you say the serendipity, because Tej also asked me to ask something about that. So he said to ask about your favorite coincidences, moments of serendipity, and how he has learned to get out of the way and trust the flow of life. He said he has some really amazing stories of serendipity, trusting the flow of life, that may inspire listeners to allow more magic into their own life. It's poetic, but I know he's a writer, so it makes sense.
He's an incredible writer.
You want to speak to that a little bit?
Oh, I have so many, man. You know what's interesting? These moments have only happened when I've been meditating consistently. I've had periods. September 2019, I started meditating. I stopped in January of 2020 because I was like, you know what? I've done it. Like, I'm good. And then life got weird. Like, it didn't get good at all. It went downhill. Started again in March 2020. Life's been flowing ever since. Just a little plug for meditation, but crazy story. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, so this is October probably of 2019. I decide, okay, I'm going to become a personal trainer. I'm doing 75 hard. I'm loving the process. And I make that decision. I'm going to be a personal trainer. So when I make that decision, within 1 week, my friend from home, who I hadn't spoken to in a year or two, shout out Ostern, he texts me out of the blue and says, hey man, need your help with something. And I was like, what's up? And he's like, I need a personal trainer. Can you create a plan for me or a diet? And I was like, of course. But did you know that I had just said that I was going to become a personal trainer? Did someone tell you? He's like, what are you talking about? So that was crazy. Second thing, that same week, I am going to the Vikings game with my brother, who also is at the Vikings game, Mike Vacanti.
Of course.
And I met Mike Vacanti there for the second time, I believe. But like, it was just crazy. And then another thing that happened was I was sending cold emails at the time. And one of the cold emails was to Charlie Jaboulet. And he loved the email that I sent him. He's like, call me on the phone. I spoke to him. And then, nothing came out of it. But a day or two later, I'm going to a cafe and I go to the bathroom, come back. And while I'm coming back and returning to my seat, this probably 50 or 60-year-old woman looks at me and strikes up a conversation with me. And I was like, what's good? Like, how you doing? Like, she's like, I just noticed you, like, I liked your vibe. And we had a conversation and I'm standing up during the conversation and she's sitting down And she starts telling me, "Oh, have you heard of this church? I really like this church. You would really like this church because someone named Charlie Jablay was speaking there last week." And I was like,
Crazy.
okay. I was like, wait a second. I sit down. I'm like, I was just on the phone with him yesterday. Do you understand how crazy? And I was just like, what the fuck is going on? So all that goes to show, like, yeah, serendipity is crazy and it's real. And yeah, man, that's all I got to say.
No, I love it. And that is great. I think what you've done though is you've put yourself in those. You've increased your probability of success through your actions, right? Through the things that you have done. So with the email, with the podcast, like talk about podcasts and Twitter especially, which I'm realizing, which we may talk about that in like towards the end of this call, because I'm about to switch over from Instagram to Twitter because I've fucking had it with Instagram. But Twitter is like a serendipitous machine, right? And so I think what I'm getting at here is like, it's yes, it is serendipity, but it's kind of also like the creating your own luck through your daily actions that you're taking day in and day out.
100%. But some of this stuff I cannot explain, my friend.
Of course. Yeah. Of course. Sometimes it's just like, all right, that's insane. Like, I don't know. It's crazy.
Yeah. And I love when that happens. I think the universe just like winks at you.
Yeah.
And you feel like, I am right where I am supposed to be in this moment in time. And that's powerful.
And you know what's even cooler is whenever you get to be the moment of serendipity for somebody else through like this podcast and stuff. Like that's what the fuck else are we supposed to do in life besides like learn from the people that we want to learn from and then pass that on to others. So it's like you get to give the opportunity to maybe some kid that emails you, right?
Okay, so here's another story.
Let's get it. Let's hear it.
That happened. I was hosting a Twitter Spaces about, I don't know, a month ago. And in this Twitter Spaces, this kid starts talking about this incredible story about how he found God and found a connection. And he's from Arkansas, mentions he's from Arkansas. And little did I know, one of my other friends who's from Arkansas was in the Twitter Spaces, messages him and says, "Hey, you're from Arkansas? I'm also from Arkansas. Where in Arkansas are you from?" And he says like this place, and it turns out that my friend was traveling to that town in that moment. And it was like,
wow, shit.
It was like, are you serious? What? And so I'm just in the Twitter Spaces hosting it, acting as that vehicle for that craziness to occur.
That is, yeah, no, it's amazing. And I think it's something that's so cool, about just the internet in general, just because one, you have those opportunities are just everywhere, but then the power to create those opportunities yourself has never been higher, right? Like you couldn't create this podcast, like you mentioned in the very beginning, 15, 20 years ago. and it's crazy.
I think we're on the cutting edge, and I think people don't realize, and when Jordan Peterson said it, it really clicked for me that in 1440, the Gutenberg press came out. And that was writing. Anyone could write if they had this machine, and anyone could spread their ideas. But today, for the first time in the last 15 years, anyone could spread their audio, anyone could spread their video. What does that mean? We are on the cutting edge of a complete revolution. And how exciting is that we get to live through that? Fires me up, man.
Yeah, no, I love it. It's okay. So here's a question. Because you are, for lack of a better term, I call myself a self-help junkie, right? Like, cause I love personal development and all this other stuff.
I'll take it.
Right. But do you think, I can take this a few different ways, but basically I'm like thinking, do you think we can ever get caught up with it? And do you also think with following and looking up to these hyper successful people, right? That all the people that you've interviewed and things, and there's other people your age or younger than us doing certain things, and we start comparing us to them. How do you kind of deal with that? How do you get through the comparison trap and not, getting too caught up in the hyper success of some of these people?
Yeah, I think it's a great question and so important. So happy you brought it up, because how I get around it, sometimes I'm like, what is all this self-help stuff? Is it actually real? Is it actually helpful to someone? And then how I understand it is like, I look at myself when I started working with Mike Vacanti in 2017, and I'm like, oh my God, I am such a different person night and day. And the growth year over year, if I look at myself in 2018 versus 2019, 2019 versus 2020, 2021 to 2020 to 2021, it's like different people. And that is so valuable because on the day to day, you look up and you're like, oh my God, how is someone like X or Y do it? Like they're so far ahead. Is it genetics? Are they wired differently? Are they giving up certain things? But then on the moments when you really feel like it's not working out, you have to go back a year and say, where was I a year ago? Where was I 2 years ago or 3 or 4? And if you can say like, oh, I'm in a better position today, and better position doesn't necessarily mean financially. It could mean just, are you kinder? Are you a kinder human being today than you were a year ago to yourself and to others? It's like, I could say yes to that year over year over year. And that's powerful. And that is what keeps me going on the journey. And the other thing that I want to point out is I had this guy, Gay Hendricks, on the podcast. And Gay Hendricks said, from the time you're born to when you're 40, Gay Hendricks is like a 80-year-old psychologist, brilliant. And he's like, 0 to 40 is when you're growing. 40 beyond is when you're giving it away. And I think that's so powerful because it's like you build yourself up, you become as high of a version as possible, and then you let go of it all. Yeah. And it's like, that's the point. The point is not to like acquire the most, to have the most, to be the best person. Like that's great, but like, what are you going to do with that? Right. The point is so that like, if you give it away, it makes the full circle complete.
Yeah, of course. Again, going back to the topic what we talked about earlier, it's like, what else are we supposed to do? Like, what else makes sense, right? I think that does make the most sense. One thing that I've heard before, this might have been from Nate Green, actually. He's actually big into, real quick, with meditation, do you use an app?
No.
Okay, so have you heard of the Waking Up app?
With
Sam Harris? Yeah. So Nate Green is the director of marketing now with Waking Up, right? So he went from fitness to copywriting to like spirituality. And one of the things that he mentioned, he was like, the interesting paradox of self-improvement is that like to win at self-improvement, you shouldn't need self-improvement anymore. Right? You know what I'm saying? Like
says something similar.
The ultimate self-improvement is not needing self-improvement anymore. And I think that's where you kind of get into that 40 and beyond. It's kind of just like, of course, like with kids and things like that, I think giving back, it's kind of inherently built into our DNA and then society and everything. But it's
I never thought about it like that.
Here we are. We're connecting dots out here, Danny.
Yeah, that's great. I never thought about like kids are the natural progression of give and grand even more so.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, no, exactly. So this brings up the question. So like what do you see? What is in the future? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish? Like, what are you excited about? Where do you, I think I heard you say you wanted to be like the biggest number one podcast in the world. So talk about that a little bit. What's future Danny looking like?
Yeah. It's so crazy because I had a conversation with Chris Williamson yesterday, who's a great podcaster, very calm. And he was like we were talking about how do you figure out what you want to want? Because not just like, and how, man, I haven't thought through what I'm about to say. So it's like, it's hard, man, but
we're here. Take your time. No, I want you to take your time. I'm going to talk real quick, give you a second, think about it. Lay it on us.
You're the man. No, what I'm trying to say though, is like, we can fall into these traps, right? Where like we figure out what we want to do. And then like, I want to have great conversations with people. That's like why I started the podcast. And then all of a sudden my goal is to become the number one podcast in the world. And where does that come from? Does that come from ego? Do I just want that recognition, like, and really dive into that and understand that? So that's kind of how I'm thinking about that goal in this moment, in truth, like just to give you my truth and honesty. But one thing I do want to do is like have a stadium of people and create that serendipity and create that connection, to have all the energy that people give to each other and out there would be electric.
Yeah.
And I feed off that, and I feed off the energy that they give me. But like, imagine if it was contained in one place. So I would say that's like a really important goal for me right now, the future. And something that really excites me is, can I get a group of people like you and me in a stadium all at once together? And if I can do that, that would be a mission complete and a job well done for me.
I agree. And we should, I hope we can do that one day. What's interesting is that sometimes at the end of the podcast, I ask people what their alternative career would be if they could have any skill, if they could do whatever, and we may get to that at the end. But when you talked about that, I resonated a lot because my alternative career, I always said that I would love to be a stand-up comedian, right? So like being a stand-up comedian in an arena, and like what's better, like speaking of course is one, but if you can actually tell stories and make people laugh, it's like that energy. Like I want it. Just give me that.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's crazy because that's a comedian or stand-up comic is someone who has social commentary and looks at the world in an interesting way. And you have to be able to connect that way to something that the audience is going to laugh at. I mean, that's awesome.
Dude, I'm telling you, if you don't,
across.
Yes. Okay, cool. Yeah. No, what you should do if you don't listen, I don't know how much stand-up you listen to, but if you need kind of the creative boost, like one thing that I love doing is starting and ending my day with stand-up comedy, and not even necessarily just like the actual shows on Netflix and things, but like their podcasts, just being around the comedians in general. It's such it's great for just laughing and being in a better mood, but the creativity, and because like you said, the way they see the world, the wittiness and cleverness, it's unmatched.
Yeah. Who's your go-to?
So it depends. There's quite a few people. I do love like Tom Segura and Bert Kreischer with Two Bears, One Cave. I love listening to them. Who else? Let's see. There's quite a few, right? Like, and it's also different. Their podcasts and then their actual stand-up. There can be a bunch of different overlays, but as long as you find people that you really do enjoy listening to and they make you laugh and think differently, starting into your day with those can be huge.
Have you heard of do you watch all the episodes?
Yes, for sure.
Okay. So do you know the guy who they signed like as a contract, like their joke contract, their joke, he's like a football player. Do you know what I'm talking about?
A joke contract.
I don't even know if it was a joke. They were agents for someone.
Is this Two Bears, One Cave? Is it? I think this might be. Yeah. Okay. You're talking about, are you talking about Tom and Bert?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
So someone tagged me on Twitter and was like, that dude, I don't know his name, he has the same energy as Danny Miranda. And I was like, I looked it up. I was like, yeah, that's kind of true. The football player.
Yes.
Is it all coming back?
Handshakes. Because we were talking, I didn't know you were still talking about Two Bears, One Cave. I thought you were talking about some other comedian or something. I was trying to put it together. I told
that so poorly. I'm so sorry.
No, it's all good. I'm clearly all over the map here, but we're doing it. We're doing it, Danny. That's so funny. One thing I wanted to tell you though, was that with your podcast, because I know you have, these super high performers and all these very popular people. And I know that we can get very caught up in giving our audience what they want and what they expect. And then we always want to grow and stuff as well. But I can honestly tell you, I don't know if you've had any of your close, like best friends on the podcast yet, who are just like quote unquote normal people. But I've done it with a few times. Every time I go back home, so I'm originally from Kentucky and I'm in New York City right now. Right. So I go back home and I have all my like normal friends, not like internet friends. And we just, I have had multiple podcasts with them and it's been the funnest. Of course, you just chill. And I don't know if you're drinking or not, but I love myself some bourbon, right? Get some bourbon, hang out, turn on the mics, and you just ramble. You just riff.
I'm sure it's great.
All I'm saying is, if you like going forward, you should 100% do that, because not only will you really enjoy it and you'll get a lot out of it, also your friend will be so energized because they know the types of people that you interview and how many people actually listen to it. And then they like, I'm telling you, they'll be buzzing the entire time.
I think it's such a good idea. And I think that constraints like that, like having a podcast where you're like, okay, guys, this is a podcast, like this is real. That makes it for such a great experience. Whereas like if you were just shooting the shit, it would be great, but it wouldn't, like you don't have that constraint of a podcast.
Yes, and you know what? You know what the difference is? What's so funny is I did one with one of my best friends for a long time, and we got too drunk and recorded the first one, and it was terrible because what I did was I turned into interviewer Matt, and I started like going in the origin story. I tried to just like take it as a normal interview if I didn't know the person at all, and it was terrible because people are going to listen to that just to hear you shoot the shit with your best friend. Nobody's listening to you and your best friend riff, trying to get the same information in the podcast with Gary V. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. 100%. That's a great point.
But it's just, I think that's the coolest thing about what we do though, is that you can create your own utopia. So it's just like from what somebody who's done it, and it's just, and I do get good feedback. People are like, I was dying laughing the whole time. It won't get as many views or whatever, but who gives a fuck? Just do it, and I promise you, your friend will love it, you will love it, and certain select audience listeners will love it as well.
It's a great idea. I'm gonna definitely give it a try.
You should. You absolutely should. Let's see. We've rambled into so many different territories and things like that. I'm trying to think here. One of the things that I did have. Let me see. Actually, you know what? I want to go. Let's go into Twitter a little bit. I want to know, because you talked about such a left turn from what we were talking about, but it's all good. We're here.
All good.
With your writing on Twitter, because you talked about how you like to schedule your tweets and things like that, and that's allowed you to really sit down and focus with your writing. What I want to know is, what does that routine look like? I want to know, like, okay, I'm gonna start writing tweets at 9 a.m. or whatever. What happens? What happens maybe like from 8:30 to 9? Basically, what I want to know is, what's your process look like specifically with these things?
It's a great question. So for me, it's just getting a cup of coffee, sitting down at the coffee at the desk rather, sitting down. I'm looking at it right over here, and just getting myself to 20 minutes after that cup of coffee where my energy is flowing, where I'm feeling good. I've already done my meditation. When I wake up, I do 60 minutes of meditation. I sometimes do 20 minutes, but for the most part, it's 60 minutes. So I've got all the things that are in my mind out of the mind, and I've become aware of them. And then get the coffee, sit down at the desk, start typing. That's just the process.
Do you ramp up at all? That's what I'm curious. And I love the rituals of people. Like, some people are weird. Like, do you ramp up? Do you turn? Because sometimes I'll have a list of Twitter people that I follow that I think are smart and I get ideas from. You're on the list. Don't worry. Then I just go through and I read that. And then whenever it sparks a thought, it kind of gets the gears going towards productive work.
Yeah. So some days I'll sit at the typewriter I feel like I'm in the 1950s. And
you light your oil can. You light your oil light. Yeah. You should.
I'll sit at the typewriter and I'll be like, man, I have no ideas today. Like it's not coming to me. And in that case, I'll give myself a break because I know ideas will come throughout the day. And it's just becoming aware of the moments that become ideas. And that's what happens when you tweet. It's like you realize, like, oh, that could be a tweet. That conversation could be a tweet. That passage that I just read could turn into a tweet. And I would say much more of my writing happens there than it does like me sitting down, getting ready to write. I'm very much inspired by things, and I always jot down. I try to, as much as possible, to jot down in my notes folder or in the Twitter drafts of when I find a tweet or when I find an idea that sparks me.
Mm-hmm. And do you do do you set a timer? Do you do the Pomodoro 25 minute? What do you do? Do you have any method there?
So the best thing that I found is to have someone who is there. So like I FaceTime my friend who is also trying to work and is alone, and we go back and forth. And so it's an accountability thing as well, where I'll be like, oh, I'm going to do this or do that. And that's by far the best.
Ooh, that's interesting. That's cool. I like that.
Yeah. Even just having someone you seeing someone else makes you more accountable to do what you need to do.
Yeah. It's even like, even going to a coffee shop or somewhere external or something, like where you have kind of the social pressure to keep going, it can
like
definitely help.
Your screen is facing everyone else, so they see if you're on Instagram or whatever, but like they don't care.
Yeah.
But you still like,
of course,
like psychologically understand that you're going to be doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Cool. I wanted to touch on that because I'm sure maybe some of your audience may listen to it, whatever. I know that they like that stuff as well. I tried to bleed both of our audiences together with this one. And I knew that we would have a great conversation, man. And we'll wrap this up because I do want to be respectful of your time. The last thing is, what should people do next, Danny? After listening to this, whatever comes to the very beginning of your mind, like, what should people do next after listening to this?
I would say call a friend who you haven't spoke to in a while, someone who's optimistic, someone who can bring you up. If you've listened this far, I appreciate you so much and I'm so grateful. Take this conversation and actually do something with it. And by something that, if that's calling a friend, good. If that's a workout, even better. Like, do something to make your life better. And that would mean the world to me. So that's my final ask for the people.
And even cooler, record it and put it on the internet.
Oh, that would be, you're building in public there. You're getting it going.
That's it. Danny, perfect. That was beautiful. Okay, last thing, where can people find out more about you and the podcast, etc.?
Yeah, so the podcast is the Danny Miranda podcast 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Conversations exactly like this one. And then Twitter. Let me know your thoughts about this episode on Twitter, twitter.com/Danny Miranda. Hey, Danny Miranda. Oh my God. I wish I got the Danny Miranda handle, but no, hey, Danny Miranda on Twitter. And thank you everyone for listening. And thank you for the conversation, man. This has been so much fun.
Yeah, of course, man. We'll definitely, hopefully we can do it again soon. I know you're in the New York area. Maybe we can, after COVID and stuff, things work out. Serendipity, baby. We'll hang out, we'll chill, talk more. But Danny, thank you so much for doing this, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, man.